This video is a follow-up to my retrospective commentary video, My First Time in Dark Souls. This video mostly covers various pieces of content that were not discussed in the original Dark Souls video. If you haven't watched the original My First Time in Dark Souls video, I highly recommend watching that before watching this video. Full spoilers for Dark Souls moving forward. If you're all good, enjoy. Last year, I released My First Time in Dark Souls, a retrospective commentary hybrid video documenting my first time playing through From Software's 2011 classic, Dark Souls. Despite my total inexperience, my journey through its bleak, oppressive world set in front of me was an undeniably cherished one, shedding light on so many elements that made Dark Souls one of its generation's greatest gaming treasures. I experienced a lot of feelings throughout my trek, but once Gwyn was defeated and the New Game Plus began, it became apparent that my first time in Dark Souls was pretty incomplete. Many of the comments made it clear as day that I missed a lot of key areas that are worth exploring, and I didn't even touch the downloadable content section Artorias of the Abyss. With a world so imposing but also rich with gems sitting beneath the surface, I figured that I actually hold to that promise that I made 1 year ago. My first time in Dark Souls remains a roller coaster ride, a collective of agony and ecstasy that ultimately sat in the pantheon of my gaming experiences. But I feel you all have waited long enough. I can't fully assure you that every minute detail will be covered, but I at least believe that some of the larger portions of missed content deserve their place in the sun. This is my first time in Dark Souls. Kinda. Sorta. Whatever. Let's get started. If you've paid close attention to the footage so far, you might have noticed something missing from the game. Aside from a handful of developer notes, there are no messages peppering the landscape around Dark Souls' world. That's because, in order to use the character from my previous video, I'm playing the Prepare to Die edition of the game, which unfortunately has had its online servers permanently taken down. This means that multiplayer community features are no longer in effect. While this sounds like a minor thing, it did change how my playtime felt. Dark Souls community features were fleeting messages, distant but still loosely connecting me to other players' experiences. It was a strong way to not just provide hints and guidance to newer players like myself, but to create a circuit of communication and cultivating the player base in a fascinating way. Without those messages, Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition felt lonely. I know the world already had its share of melancholy and outright sadness at times, but this was a very different feeling than when I played through Dark Souls' main campaign back in 2022. I truly did feel isolated. I wasn't able to rely on other places to guide me. While I did find some satisfaction in discovering secrets on my own, or simply stumbling into them, Prepare to Die Edition was my first experience with a Souls game that it felt purely confining. I think someone can still experience Dark Souls' stronger attributes without this online connectivity, but something big is missing. Without that connection, as loose as that might be, Dark Souls is a different experience without it. And I'd even argue it's a worse one. But even without the community features, I was dedicated to returning to the world of Dark Souls. My character that I created more than a year ago had a New Game Plus playthrough on the plate to prepare me for some of the more challenging fights that I was bound to face. The decision to use the same character was based on a number of factors. First, I wanted to retain a lot of my gear and playstyle. I guess I grew so used to using the halberd that it became second nature when attacking, due to its range and melee strength. The second reason was a more sentimental one, as this was my first real experience with Dark Souls as a full game. I wanted to hold on to those memories, I suppose, and being able to tackle the game again as such a familiar avatar did feel right. Character creation has become a strong component toward expression and connecting the player with their avatar of choice, and I believe Dark Souls, with its customizable builds and open-ended exploration, gives the player the same feeling of unity. My halberd-wielding, helmet-donning hero still had a lot of life in him, so it was time to finally dive back in. There was a lot of missed content to see, and while I'm sure there are some bits that I could potentially overlook even in this video, I wanted to finally tackle some key areas like Ash Lake, the Painted World, and the Artorias of the Abyss DLC. Before getting to those areas, I had to first return back to where it all began. The Undead Asylum marked the start of my journey in Dark Souls, so discovering that you could return to it to experience some extra parts was actually pretty neat. While there isn't a ton to see, there is something compelling about trekking back to the very beginning. Games that let you return to square one often put player progress into perspective, even if combat is not a focus at that point. But even before actually setting foot in the Asylum again, I have to address how exactly you get back there. Finding a higher path to the bird's nest, curling into a ball, and waiting for the bird to grab you to send you back to the Asylum is crazy. What makes it crazy is that the bird doesn't grab you immediately. You have to wait several seconds for it to grab you. So any player that isn't aware is likely going to stand back up thinking that the action's meaningless. This kind of cryptic design screams retro. There are hidden bits of intrigue that only players in the know can fully utilize, so once again, I can't help but be impressed at the level of trust From Software have toward players to find out about this naturally. I'm sure that a player message could have guided me in this direction if they were available, but even looking at my serverless situation, it's difficult to get mad at this decision. It's admirable seeing the devs act this rebellious toward gameplay coherence, even at the expense of less inquisitive players' attention. After landing back at the Asylum, I made my way to the bonfire to prep, only to stumble into another boss fight immediately after through a surprise crumbling floor. The stray demon gave me some trouble right out of the gate due to me still getting used to damage of a New Game Plus. The frontal AoE move definitely caused some headaches, so many headaches that I decided to keep exploring the Asylum instead of taking on the boss right away. The Undead Asylum isn't a huge area, though there were some extra items that proved important in exploring other regions. In particular, there's the peculiar doll that I grabbed after revisiting myself from the very start of the game. Knights gave me some issues in the narrow passages toward my cell, though I did like the subtle touch of being able to see the stray demon in the dungeon directly next to the cell hallways. With the peculiar doll in hand, I returned to the stray demon's battlefield, and once I realized the limitations of that obnoxious AoE attack, it didn't cause much trouble. In retrospect, it shouldn't be shocking that the Asylum Demon's model would be reused, though with me having already fought the Demon Fire Sage in my initial playthrough, I did grow weary of this particular model appearing so many times. Yes, the three aren't identical, but the utility of reusing assets like the Taurus Demon or Bell Gargoyle as common enemies just wasn't as clear here. By the time I wrapped up my fight with the Stray Demon, I didn't really want to see these guys again for a while. After briefly nabbing a rusted iron ring, I said goodbye to the Asylum and was ready to press onward toward the next piece of content. At the bottom of Blight Town, across the poisonous swamp, stands a giant tree guarded by surprisingly mobile leech monsters. After taking out the enemies and tapping a couple of illusory walls, I entered the Great Hollow, a collection of winding branch paths downward with obnoxious basilisk enemies for good measure. I already had anxiety as the branches twisted atop dangerous drops, but getting cursed during my trek to the bottom definitely put me on edge. It was appreciated that a bonfire was at the top of the tree, but talk about nerve-wracking, man. This descent made every step a perilous one, punishing me for going too quickly or misjudging my drops. Fortunately, the ladders throughout the Great Hollow were not as rare as I expected, and I eventually made it down to the next area, Ash Lake. I heard a lot about Ash Lake from the comments, and yeah, this is album cover level beautiful. I was awestruck at seeing a giant lake with seemingly infinite trees reaching upward toward the sky. Between the blurred landscape in the distance and its reverbed choral music theme, it really did feel otherworldly, a sort of strange realm that hypnotized within its space. But I didn't bask in the world for long. After lighting the bonfire, I prepared myself to take on the major enemy of the area, a black hydra. The Hydra had already terrified me when I took one on back in Darkroot Basin, and the wide open area in Ash Lake made its water projectiles treacherous in their own right. Limited on ranged ammunition and chock full of stubborn determination toward my melee build, I decided to take on the Hydra directly, only to be defeated immediately. But after reviving at the nearby bonfire, I came to a dreadful realization. My max HP is cut because I got cursed by basilisks in the Great Hollow. I don't have any purging stones to cure the curse. I'm also too early in the game to warp to other bonfires, so I'd have to go back up the Great Hollow on foot, then walk all the way to where my curse can be cured. Yeah, I was kinda stuck. With all this against me, I remained stubborn. Very stubborn. I was gonna beat this Hydra and get it the hell out of my way. So I did something that I never really thought of doing till that point. Changing my build. Specifically, I was going to tank this thing. I equipped as much durable armor as possible, hoping that it was strong enough to withstand attacks from the Hydra. It took many tries and many failures, but eventually I was able to chip away at the Hydra's heads and inflict enough damage to wipe it out, making my trek across Ash Lake's shores much easier. It was an absolute relief, giving me the drive to press onward down the beaches and discover the Dragon Covenant on the other side. While I didn't accept the Covenant, I did feel fulfilled in being able to finally visit Ash Lake. Though I will say that I wish there was more content in this area. The Hydra is a challenge, no question, but if there was an actual boss enemy in Ash Lake, I think there would have been more to talk about. The aesthetic direction of this area is nothing short of breathtaking, a portrait-esque dreamscape that is able to stay memorable on that alone. That being said, it's not a treasure trove of unique or interesting encounters, which is admittedly a disappointment. With Ash Lake's bonfires lit, I climbed back up the Great Hollow and got ready for what was next. My New Game Plus playthrough took me forward to Anor Londo again, and with the peculiar doll in hand, I gained access to one of the most interesting areas of the game, the painted world of Ariamis. Considering the steps you need to take to actually get there, it became clear as to how easy this region is to miss. But after experiencing what the painted world has to offer, it's also clear as to why so many people recommended that I check it out. The snow-covered ruins of the city are sensibly picturesque upon arrival, but after even just several minutes of exploration, the painted world reveals itself to be a giant playground. Yes, there are key actions that lead to the world's exit, but the shocking amount of open-endedness really drew me into an already captivating location. No other singular region in Dark Souls gave off this design direction to me, and that was a revelation I happily accepted the more I dug into its layout. Of course, Dark Souls still manages to populate the landscape with plenty of peril. The Harpies and Hollows were decent enough challenges on their own, but the toxic snow rats and aggressive engorged Hollows really made exploration tricky. I noped right out of a fight with the undead dragon, instead pushing myself to find collectibles and inch closer and closer to other areas of the map. The phalanx enemies that brawled across the courtyard proved a substantial nuisance, but nimbly dodging them let me check out some additional pathways, including the ladder leading down the well to the sewers beneath the ruins. My lingering nightmares that are the wheeled skeletons made the dark rooms even more of an unpleasant surprise, though I was able to stumble into an illusory wall to grab the Annex key for some extra goodies, then hit the switch to unlock the path to the region's exit. My encounter with crossbreed Priscilla wasn't that difficult of a boss fight, though I do love her aesthetic design, and the invisibility where you need to check her prints in the snow was a fantastic little trick. Another interesting bit was the decision to bypass her boss fight entirely, instead deciding to exit the painted world without confrontation. Considering how Dark Souls fleshes out its lore and cast so well, all with very limited exposition and few cutscenes, this reinforced the idea that my existence in the painted world was unnatural. Giving the player even a simple decision like this might seem like fictional agency, a way to give the player a choice that ultimately doesn't matter. While Priscilla doesn't totally avoid this pitfall, they do complement the very idea of the painted world. A still life work, a moment suspended in time. With that in mind, I never shook off the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here. Perhaps it's the different steps the player must take to get there, but the whole thing gave off a vibe of self-containment, a standalone bit of hidden content that players like me could very well miss entirely. This was a setting in another space. Those layers of separation that the painted world has with the rest of Dark Souls are notable, but considering just how many recommendations I had toward exploring this area, I'm thrilled that I was able to check it out, even for just an hour or two. Back in Anor Londo, there was another boss I wanted to challenge before addressing the DLC. With my rematch with Ornstein and Smough complete, I was able to dispel the illusion of Guinevere and reveal the identity of Dark Sun Gwyndolin. Immediately, it was very interesting that Gwyndolin dims the lights of the city upon the player attacking the illusion of Guinevere. The bright warmth that felt so inseparable from Anor Londo up till that point had vanished, leaving behind an unnerving world that seemed cursed in its obscured shadow. As I traveled to the tomb and began the boss fight with Gwyndolin, I was introduced to the endless hallway that was our battlefield. These types of impossible spaces have always been appealing to me. They've made things feel strange and alien, unsettling in all the right ways. That being said, Gwyndolin's attacks being so easily dodged behind the pillars didn't shine as exemplary boss design in my eyes. I assumed that Gwyndolin's fight would have more phases or patterns, but alas, the confrontation, while interesting on a presentation level, didn't force me to adjust my playstyle or approach the battle in any kind of unique way. For such an interesting character with such a dramatic backstory, Gwyndolin had a combat encounter that unfortunately disappointed. The Artorias of the Abyss DLC is the closest I can get to playing full new content for Dark Souls 1. Easily the most recommended and requested portion of the game that I did miss my first time around. I was pretty excited to finally tackle this section, and even with my preparation through the rest of DS1 before approaching the entrance, I gotta say there were plenty of surprises in store. The journey into the past was one of them, as my character was literally dragged through the unlocked portal and into the Sanctuary Garden. The guardian beast of the area remains one of the best first impressions I can ask for. Despite the boss not being an enormous challenge, its variety of fast attacks drove me to play aggressively, stay conscious of my zoning, and dodge on point. It definitely set the stage for the kinds of combat challenges I would find in several of the DLC's bosses, and I was all the more excited to continue forward after wrapping up the battle. Not far from the Sanctuary Guardian battlefield was Ulasail's Sanctuary, which stunned me for one key reason. It's light out, like normal daylight. After trudging through grim, hazy ruins or even in pitch darkness, it was a totally unusual sight to see what seemed like a peaceful forest with warm, comforting light shining from above. The Sanctuary didn't feel like a Dark Souls stage in the slightest. Even when the sun was shining like in the Undead Burg, Dark Souls never made a mood in any way close to what's shown in the Sanctuary. That fantastic impression contrasts so much with what Dark Souls displayed up till then. It shook me. I wanted to see more right away. The Royal Wood didn't lose this feeling. It frequently emitted a gentle and serene vibe, with birds chirping in the background, in fact. That being said, the more ground I tread, the more I started to realize what to expect from the Royal Wood. It's a nice region that conveniently has some shortcut elevators, but aside from some secret items, Royal Wood relies on swarms of stronger enemies and not too much else. The enemies do feel more challenging than those in the base game, I'll give them that. Even with my trusty halberd that I had been upgrading throughout my playthrough, the sturdier minions managed to knock me out a few times, thanks to their wide range and seemingly explosive recoil attack. After getting jump-scared by a dragon on the bridge, I meandered around the Royal Wood until the next fog wall, and was introduced to the big knight himself, Artorias the Abyss Walker. Artorias was a challenge from start to finish, thanks in no small part to his shockingly high attack range. The greatsword alone gave the guy considerable reach, but his leaping slashes managed to provide incredible mobility in what's otherwise a standard one-on-one fight against a Dark Souls legend. Compared to the Sanctuary Guardian, whose combo of short and long-range moves encouraged mastery of my zoning, Artorias wasn't quite as unpredictable when it came to distance and gave me some breathing room when I needed it. Not to say this is a weak boss fight in any sense. It did remind me of Gwyn, who stood as a no-frills duel without any sort of colossal backdrop. Just two similarly sized fighters taking each other on. Considering Artorias' place in the Dark Souls canon, however, this battle had a ton of anticipation behind it. Up till the actual fight, there was lore scattered about of who Artorias was, if anything through his connection to Sif and the ring you use when approaching the Four Kings boss fight. All things considered, the fight itself did live up to that anticipation. I felt like I was going up against a real myth walking, someone who felt inseparable from Dark Souls' legacy. I mean, he's in the DLC's name, for God's sake. Upon wrapping up the Knight Artorias fight and finding a locked door above the Colosseum, I lit up a bonfire in the newly available township. The township was chock full of bloathead enemies, melee and magic focused alike, but the return to the decrepit ruin aesthetic after the breath of fresh air that was the Royal Wood gave off an almost spiteful vibe. The DLC's first impression had clearly run itself out, dragging the player toward a more familiar sense of oppression that the main game had constantly emitted. Wandering around the city rooftops netted me some cool secrets, but I was pushed further into the depths of the township, only to be wiped out by some obnoxious magic-firing sorcerers. The township doesn't really do anything shocking beyond its challenge, and almost feels too standard for its own good when stood up next to the Royal Wood, or even some of the base Dark Souls regions. While I'd love to hang around Darkroot Garden or Anor Londo more, I can't really say the same for the township. It's a fine enough area, but nothing to write home about. But the transition to the Chasm of the Abyss is a real shock to the system. It's very creepy. Though not as difficult as the Tomb of the Giants, it definitely gave me some flashbacks. Whipping out the skull lantern kept me on track, even with the absolutely haunting humanity floating about the shadows. Their lack of aggression was appreciated, but the way they silently swarm you just kept me on edge. And without any clear direction, the Abyss really did feel like a sensibly brooding and claustrophobic region. Navigating these worlds of surrounding darkness just makes it tough to breathe, and once I saw the fog wall at the bottom of the cliffs, I didn't have much air left in my lungs. I wasn't sure what was coming next, but I was as ready as I was gonna be. Or so I thought. Manus, Father of the Abyss, wiped me out pretty effortlessly. I didn't stand much of a chance, but I think I know why. Go ahead and call it sour grapes, but I had some unfinished business on my mind and my resolve wasn't really ironclad. I remembered that dragon jump scare at the Royal Wood and felt like investigating that a bit further. There was still a bit more to get done in the DLC before wrapping things up, and I wasn't quite ready to take on the big baddie that dragged me into the past in the first place. So I found the dragon at the waterfall basin and... yeah, it didn't go very well. I was going to need a bit of help. Fortunately, my wandering in the township led me to a mimic that held the crest key, which could unlock the door I saw earlier after defeating Artorias. I'm not entirely surprised that the key would be hidden in one of these things, but after dealing with so many bloatheads simply getting through the interiors of the township, it seemed to be asking more than I feel was really necessary. That being said, this wasn't a mandatory action to wrap up the DLC, so I can kind of see where From Software were coming from on this. I was pushing myself further than originally expected. I wanted to really finish the DLC, all bosses in mind. I got to meet Goth, a dragon-hunting giant who was considerate enough to shoot down the dragon that was causing me trouble. While finding the crest key was a bit more cryptic than originally assumed, I liked the idea of getting an NPC to help out with a challenge. As I said when reaching Seat the Scaleless in the other Dark Souls video, lateral thinking can be a better weapon than mere combat skills in several cases. The giant's assistance also fleshes out the world of Dark Souls, builds its lore, and shows the narrative connection that the region's inhabitants play amongst the more utilitarian elements of the game. Souls storytelling has always been something of a slow burn, rarely ever being in your face, and giving the player as much as they want to process. In mere minutes, I was able to see Goth as a strong, generous character instead of a mere NPC. It was another slam dunk in Dark Souls cast that was really difficult to forget. Returning to the battlefield, I began my ordeal with who I'd argue is the toughest boss in the DLC. Black Dragon Kalameet. The dragon is a zoning nightmare with wide and hard-hitting melee attacks and ranged fire blasts that punished me for grabbing distance. It's a reminder of the same techniques of the Sanctuary Guardian, where you can't stay in one spot to really get the most out of the encounter. Reading Kalameet's attack tells became essential studying for the fight, but only after many, many defeats. Fortunately, the arena was massive, so I wasn't fighting with the camera as much as with other fights. This was a very unforgiving battle to me, one of the hardest in my entire Dark Souls journey, but one that I was ultimately able to endure and complete. Kalameet was defeated, and I was ready to fight Manus once again. Manus was not what I was used to as far as Dark Souls bosses go. After taking on huge titanic creatures and nimble warriors across dozens of hours of game time, Manus managed to surprise me in many ways, a true test of my character's moveset and my own skills. Before doing anything to the boss, there was the arena's size. Despite being surrounded by a thick darkness, the actual battlefield wasn't nearly as small as I expected. At first, I was getting flashbacks to the Iron Golem fight at Top Sen's fortress, but once I realized that I could move further through the shadows, Manus became easier to track and ultimately evade. The next surprise was Manus' aggression. Beyond just having fast attacks and combos, he was a powerful foe who didn't give me much time to heal when I needed it. Out of all of the bosses in Dark Souls 1, Manus, on a mechanical level anyway, felt the most out of place amongst the brigade. He's very fast, and that kind of mobility didn't seem very Dark Souls to me. I was more used to slower but powerful bosses, ones whose tells demanded patience and concentration. Even Artorias and Gwyn, with their fast offense, didn't match up with the kinds of maneuvers that Manus demanded of me. After so much time moving through Dark Souls' world, taking on enemy after enemy, boss after boss, Manus was the final test, a culmination of every bit of combat skill that I had refined over the journey. While I'd argue Black Dragon Kalameet was the most challenging boss in Artorias of the Abyss, Manus was the one that seemed most fitting as the last confrontation, a colossal titan of darkness whose unhinged rage feels unpredictable in all the right ways. He might not have the artistic solitude of Dark Souls' final fight against Gwyn, but to round out the entire journey, going back to basics with a giant horrific entity, one almost unspeakable in its forms and features, made sense. Capping off my time in Dark Souls, Manus was a fittingly wild challenge. With so much behind me, after more than 80 hours of game time in my file, I have conflicting emotions toward my first time in Dark Souls. As you can guess, even with my time in this new content, I do have trouble calling what you saw in this video my first time in Dark Souls. That's because, in preparation for my journey to the new regions and bosses that I missed, I retread some old ground, and replayed through several base game areas too. It was pretty cool returning to areas like the Duke's Archives and Darkroot Basin when I was more prepared for their tricks, but it did reiterate the point that your first journey in Dark Souls is difficult to surpass. When you're playing a game for the first time, you're bound to experience something that a return journey just can't tap again. The emotional and cognitive elements of playing a game shift effortlessly. Simply knowing what's coming can transform the moment into something completely different. Dark Souls is a clear example of that. It's one reason why my other video exists. You never forget your first, and as much as we'd like to wipe our memories and play a game blind again, we really can't do that. The most we can do is hold on to the good bits of that first playthrough and treasure them the way we would any valuable memories. It's a concession, but one that we constantly have to confront. This sentiment is not to say that Dark Souls doesn't encourage repeat playthroughs. It absolutely does. It just makes those return journeys very different experiences from when you're a fresh adventurer simply trying to make sense of the world you're exploring. In that way, Dark Souls becomes a familiar, almost homely trek over time. It felt lonelier without the community features, yeah, but in strict contrast to that isolation, Dark Souls always had a link, a growing connection with the world itself. The NPCs I talked to, the enemies I fought, even the character and build I had become so accustomed to using, there was something bringing it all together into a cohesive whole. Maybe Dark Souls' recurring strength is that bond where that familiarity, despite how bleak and treacherous the world actually is, seems strangely nurturing and supportive. Replayability has been a discussion point for games for ages now, and while your New Game Plus can go on for so long, what really makes this game feel replayable is returning to a place of comfort. Firelink Shrine, in particular, is likely to go down in history as one of gaming's most memorable locations because it exists as a place of homeliness within an oppressive universe. It stands out so clearly, a light amongst the darkness, and that tight grip it has on many players' memories of the game is a testament to Dark Souls' unbreakable legacy. It's why, even when being forced to forego the ability to play it again for the first time, Dark Souls is a thriving game where those repeat playthroughs hold up. Like a kindled bonfire, it all still burns brightly. And I think that, with all that in mind, I can close the book on this tale. I've seen a lot of amazing things in this cursed but thrilling universe that'll remain embedded in my psyche for ages. Dark Souls managed to make me feel things that other games didn't, a journey through both hellish frustration and transcendent victory. It's a game whose heartbeat loudly echoes throughout the gaming landscape and the minds of those who explored it, one that's changed the medium for the better in so many ways. And I do hope that, whenever I do return to this series, that you'll all be there too, cheering me on, helping me through the mires and mazes. So thank you for sticking around. Until next time, praise the sun.